Okay, welcome back from lunch. And this is, we all know this is the deadly time. Everyone's eaten, and they would probably rather be napping, and instead you get us. So congratulations here. So I'm gonna have a little warm up here. That's to get us going this afternoon. Who has ever heard me speak before? Okay, what do I always do when I speak? I sing, right, I sing. So we're gonna sing here, and so, sorry. I've been told to stay over in this corner, you guys. So if I start wandering over there, like, give me the, what is that called? What is that gestures are called?
Total physical response.
Total physical response, come on, just like get me over there, okay. Oh my God, look at how the warm-up is giving it's all like gyrating here. Here we go. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about a project we've been doing in Fresno, and so we sing a lot of songs in that project, and so this is one of the songs that we're doing, and then you'll see later that I have dedicated it today to my good friend Linda Espinosa, and you'll see why here. So here we go. This is a song called Bananas, Coconuts, and Grapes, and I'll try to manage with the microphone, but I've got to move around here. So here we go. It goes, I like bananas, coconuts, and grapes. I like bananas, coconuts, and grapes. I like bananas, coconuts, and grapes, and that's why they call me Tarzan of the Apes. Okay, yeah, you need to beat your chest there when we get to that part, okay? Okay, here we're going to try it again. Here we go. I like bananas, coconuts, and grapes. I like bananas, coconuts, and grapes. I like bananas, coconuts, and grapes, and that's why they call me Tarzan of the Apes. Okay, very nice. Now, in honor of our dual language day here, we're going to sing this song in Espanol, and it's Plátanos, Cocos, y Uvas. Okay, are we ready? Okay, I want to hear especially you bilingual folks sing out. Here we go. Ready? Me gustan los Me gustan plátanos, cocos y uvas. Me gustan plátanos, cocos y uvas, pero eso me llaman Linda de los Monos. Okay, here we go. Now, come on, Linda. Here we go. Let's sing out. Here we go. Me gustan plátanos, cocos y uvas. Me gustan plátanos, cocos y uvas. Me gustan plátanos, cocos y uvas, por eso me llaman Linda de los Monos. Oh, very nice there. And Linda's going to be featuring this in her next book. You know how people have those little things in the back here. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Linda now, and she's going to talk a little bit about the NASEM report and also a little bit about sort of the research background for this work that we're doing with dual language learners, especially in our TK classes. Linda.
Thank you. I'm not sure how I feel about that picture. Move on. Oh, don't go over there. Okay. But just in case you missed it, so the title of our session is Practical and Proven Strategies for Teaching Young Dual Language Learners. So what we're going to do is we're going to take what we heard this morning and some of the other work that we've been doing and show you an example of an approach that does incorporate some of these what we call practical and proven strategies. Well, speaking of books, I actually do have a chapter of a book that is called Practical and Proven Strategies for Teaching Young Dual Language Learners. So what have we used to develop this approach? Both promoting the educational success of children and youth learning English, promising futures. And I have to tell you, I mean, if you've been following the literature at all, or if you've been coming to PD that I've been doing, or that Whit's been doing, or Carola's been doing for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, or that Marlena's been doing, we have been talking about certain principles of second language acquisition about early childhood, and about how that needs to be applied to the practical strategies that we're implementing in classrooms. We've been talking, and actually I've been talking. How far can I go?
That's too far.
You are kidding me.
That's about as far as it should be.
Okay. That's not how we got here with DLLs, I want to tell you. But so historically, we have been talking about some of these issues probably for 20 or 30 years. Some of us have been saying things with a fair amount of confidence that now is truly verified. We truly have the scientific weight and evidence behind us to say, for instance, when I was running programs in San Francisco and in San Jose Unified School District, and parents would say to me, should I start speaking English? Is that going to help my child? Well, so you know the answers now. Think 20 years ago. Would you have put your child in a Spanish immersion program? I mean, these are real questions that we did not have scientific answers to, and that teachers needed to know, what should I be telling my parents? The science, every one of you should pat yourself on the back. The science confirms much of what we've been saying for 20 or more years. And I'm like, thank you, science. Thank you, science. It doesn't matter that we wrote the report, but it's still science. And we have other studies going on all the time, thank God, and the dual language study is one of them. But the other thing that we have that I'll just look at you, but you should move your head out so I can see your eyes. He's a good-looking guy. The other thing that we have, science will never answer everything. I mean, that's just a basic of, if you're running programs, teaching programs, or whatever. So we have our experiences. We have our, probably if you looked at all of us in our combined experience, you're over a couple hundred years there. That's a lot. But that experience, that lived experience of running programs, working with families, teaching children, all of that combines with what we know from the scientific evidence. And truly, some of it's very rigorous. And so I am no longer lack any confidence in what I talk about with administrators, other researchers, and whatnot. 10 years ago, that really wasn't the case. We might have been considered differently then. So I'm going to go through this quickly because we really want to emphasize what are those instructional strategies that we've come down to. There is absolutely no debate about the fact that all infants, and I mean infants with developmental disabilities, language impairments, even infants, toddlers, preschoolers who are eventually identified as being on the spectrum, having autism to some degree, all of these children have the capacity and benefit from learning, having interventions and learning and being able to be exposed to and learn more than one language. All children, even children with special needs. That's relatively new. The other thing, and like I said this morning, that report covers birth to 21. Okay, so we're not just talking about birth to 3 or 3 to 5 or kindergarten or anything. We're really talking across the age grades and college and career. The thing that stood out for me, and I've worked mainly in the early childhood field, birth to 5, but the thing that struck me the most about reading that report, birth to 5, the whole report and contributing to the writing, we all agreed that having more than one language is an asset. That we could not, in that report, bring it up, to discuss it through the frame as, this is a problem for our children. And originally in that report, there was some of that. There was some of that discussion around it's problematic for school district administrators and whatnot. The problem lies in how we arrange our environments and how we design our instruction. The problem is not in the children. Because the children, as I like to say, are potentially gifted as we create the environments where they're allowed to and able to develop those bilingual or trilingual skills. I mean, that's certainly possible as well. But one thing, and this is something that we haven't known really well, and will take a while to sink in, I think, to saturate, because we're operating on old K-12 models of bilingual education. But when we look at the birth to 5 population, one thing we have learned in the last 5-7 years, is that when children enter kindergarten, when they have strengths in both languages, and we're talking about fairly equally distributed bilingual skills. That just doesn't happen on its own. But when they have these balanced bilingual skills, so they're not heavily dominant in their first language, they actually have a certain degree of English proficiency as well. Those are the kids who, in fact, outperform. These are DLLs, remember. Those are the kids who outperform monolinguals at 3rd grade in English reading. Now, at kindergarten entry, if you look at both their language skills, in their English, they might not come up to English monolingual norms. If you look at their Spanish skills, their Spanish oral proficiency levels and early literacy might not come up to monolingual Spanish-speaking norms at kindergarten entry. So that profile at kindergarten entry is going to look different. But it may, in fact, be exactly the profile that is going to prepare them to outperform monolingual English speakers at 3rd grade. Now, that's something our kindergarten entry assessments and kindergarten and above teachers don't always know. They're going to look a little different. They might not know all the words in English, but they might have a greater distributive vocabulary. Okay, and actually, you know what? I need to go a little more quickly because we need to get to the instructional strategies. But that point, because all of you are TK teachers, is that yes, we need to reinforce, support, use that first language in our classrooms. We also have to have a way of very intentionally introducing, exposing, and allowing children to learn and practice English. So both of those things are critically important. The other thing, and this is, okay, why don't I just stand by you? Grab me. Oh, didn't mean to do that. The other thing that is really fascinating is that we now have really good, what they call age of exposure research that says it matters when kids are exposed to a second language. Ideally, ideally it's in the first year of life because that's when that brain is particularly neurologically primed or well-suited to hearing, absorbing, and processing features of multiple languages that they then can separate in categories and start to use correctly. But the research says if they are exposed and have opportunities to use that second language before the age of 3, then they will actually have long-term higher proficiency levels in that language. Now that presents a real challenge for a lot of us. I mean, I know you guys work with TK students, so therefore, but what it means is that we have to pay attention to both those languages again. And for teachers who work with younger children, it really means they have to think about when and how do they expose children to each of those languages. The other thing that each of us as a TK teacher or supervisor or working in these classrooms is how do we assess and guarantee that all of our staff in our programs are competent speakers of the language that they are modeling. If they're modeling Spanish, you can just say, well, that's Spanish. No, that has to be good Spanish. If it's Iranian, or not Iranian, Farsi, Urdu, Bosnian, whatever the language is, that it actually is a good language model. And that's one of a really good reason why parents should continue to speak their home language, because they're going to be able to speak it in much more complex and varied ways than they would be able to speak a language they're not competent in. And that's actually been well documented. Parents who want to start speaking English don't have good proficiency, they kind of stop talking. The level of communication starts to go down, and a principle to keep in mind is language is language is language. You're going to get language with the ways in which it's structured. Any language that is well used, adequately used, is going to prepare these children to read in English. And that sometimes is a hard thing for parents. It's sometimes a counterintuitive process, because if you talk to your child and read to your child and have your child carry out their tasks in their first language, that actually is going to help them read in English. And when I had my parents, they really didn't understand that. They really felt English earlier, more intense English is what's going to help these kids. I've seen that in California superintendents' headlines. We're going to do TK. We're going to get them into. They're all going to be speaking English by first grade. Whatever. That this is their channel through which they will achieve earlier, higher levels of proficiency in English. That's not really our goal here. So the competent speakers of both language. The other thing, and I'm sure you guys all do this, but it is not an easy thing to do. Working with young children, because sometimes they get stubborn and won't talk to you or talk to you about something else. But that when our language interactions, we know that those are really, really important for lots of reasons, social, emotional, as well as language, literacy, everything, but that they have to be contingent and responsive. So as a TK teacher, I'm not going to go up to a child and say, "What is this?" And the child goes, "That's a cookie," or whatever. That's right, that's a cookie. Not that you would never do that. That's not a conversation. That's something I have poured on the child. It's like I'm raining onto these kids the things that I think they need to know. Now, obviously, that's in your mind, but what you're going to do is you're going to see where are they going? What are they interested in? What are they picking up? What are they talking about? Are they bringing in their cousin's wedding over the weekend, or where they went to their uncle's to, look at the new house that whatever. That's what they're interested in. That's where you build the vocabulary off of. So you have these frequent interactions. And I've looked at actually these charts of kids. It's way different. The amount of exposure that kids have that's frequent, interactive, and contingent, and responsive to their interests, it's very low. It's very low, typically in TK classrooms, because our job, as we learned it, was to teach them the colors, the numbers, the letters, the directions, the propositions. That was our job as TK teachers. In reality, our job as TK teachers is to engage in conversations where you enrich and extend and get that little mind even more excited about whatever that topic was and feeling really empowered to learn independently with lots of materials that you've set out. Okay, I am really going to go fast now. Stronger L1 skills, support English skills, no question about it. This group knows that. And it must be explicitly and intentionally supported, or it will decline once dual language children are exposed to English. And that is true in California, it's true in Head Start, it's true across the countries, even when you have designed 50-50 programs. It's obviously terribly true when you have primarily English language programs, but the history of our country is that once they go into settings where the primary provider, if it's a teacher, whoever it is, speaks mostly English and the instruction is in English, what you're going to have, you can see the charts. English goes up, but it never gets to where monolingual English speakers are, and native language goes down. And so historically in California, that was the problem with the that is under our control, guys. That doesn't have to be. We can definitely design programs that attend to both. And we're going to talk about program models in a minute, where you get high accelerations in both. So specific instructional approaches, scaffolding so that comprehension occurs. Anna and Whit are going to talk a lot. You can't fall asleep. Are going to talk about instructional scaffolding approaches, strategies, this frequent assessment. We don't have time to go into it today, but I really hope somebody does provide you with some background and expertise in how we conduct these formative assessments, particularly when you do not speak the child's language. I mean, people will always say, well, I can't do it. I don't speak Hindi or Farsi or Mandarin Chinese or whatever. Yes, you can, and you don't have to speak the language. That's not the issue. So the assessment, the families, we've talked about that an awful lot today because another outstanding conclusion from the research was if families don't value and continue it, those kids will lose their language, and it starts happening at 3. They start refusing to speak their home language if their families don't insist upon it. And the kids often come home and want to start speaking in English. So families are critical partners. And I think I maybe said this morning. Everybody has to believe it in their bones that it's the best thing for their kids. You are not going to give them a diet of chocolate. You are not going to give them a diet of English when your home language is something else. That's what we know is in their best interest. So, and we know that ECE teachers need specific training and competencies to meet the needs of DLLs. Many of us, most of us maybe, I don't know, you guys are nice and young and healthy, I guess. When I was trained, nobody talked to us about what if a child doesn't understand you because their first language is not English. It's typically, if it's covered in teacher prep courses, it's covered superficially. There's a study out that said most programs really don't address this issue. So all of us need advanced training, preparation, coaching, all of that around what are these strategies, how do we support multiple languages. So based on these research findings, our experiences in Los Angeles Unified and Fresno Unified School Districts and our expertise in school administration and effective professional development, we designed a comprehensive approach meeting the educational needs of young dual language learners, POLE. And this process of designing POLE, can I talk about the TK? When in 2009, there was a superintendent and it actually almost sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? It kind of was one of those magical experiences in Los Angeles Unified School District. Does anybody else here work in LAUSD? No, or did, or once, or whatever. So in LAUSD, and at that time, nowhere in the state, and almost nowhere in the country, was there this thing called transitional kindergarten in a positive way. It was usually for kids that were held back. But the very enlightened superintendent, we'll put a little crown on his head, who was Ramon Cortines. Do any of you know who Ramon Cortines is? Have you met him? Okay. He was superintendent in Pasadena. When I went to San Jose, he was superintendent in San Jose. A unique opportunity to work with the most enlightened and energetic and really accomplished superintendent. As I always used to say, every conversation started and ended with, is this good for kids? Most superintendents would tell me when I worked with them, how is this going to help me keep my job? He actually, don't get me started on this, but he actually said to me once, don't ever be afraid of being fired, Linda, because he was fired. He was fired as principal in Pasadena. He was fired as superintendent in Pasadena, and everybody kept bringing him. He was fired in New York City by Giuliani, so this guy has gone through it all, but it never, ever, ever changed his core belief. His job was to advocate on behalf of children and families. So he came up with this idea. Really, it wasn't me, and it wasn't Whit. It was his idea. We're going to do TK for those kids that are young fives. They're not prepared to enter kindergarten because they're having high failure rates, when they go into kindergarten, so that birthday cutoff date and whatnot, which is kind of a backdoor of having universal pre-K. And it's on the K-12 funding formula, which is great. And he said, here you guys, it was a team, Carola and Whit and me and Elizabeth Magruder. He said, here's $1 million, do it. Design a program and do everything you need to do to start this new program called Transitional Kindergarten. So we went through, do you remember, Carola? All the literature, all the curricula, everything that was available from pre-K through K3 that addressed the needs of a diverse population. So, and all the literature related to the curricula and to assessment and whatnot. And we designed this kind of comprehensive approach. We decided that it was going to be called personalized oral language learning because so much of what we know has to be tailored to, these kids are highly diverse even within the DL population. And oral language, at that time, even in 2009, the research said the areas that we need to focus on really are oral language. It's not the word level skill, attack skills. Those these kids look really pretty good on. It's really the oral comprehension that allows them, or the oral vocabulary and the narrative skills and the background knowledge that allows them to comprehend reading when they get into third grade. So we called it personalized oral language learning and focused in those areas. It's expanded a little bit since then. So that's how POLE came about. And then, lesson to everybody, all you youngsters out there, Cortinas retired. Whit retired. 2 other people got fired. And a whole bunch of stuff happened. So the whole program never really got institutionalized. It never really got into the everyday activities of LAUSD and disseminated and replicated throughout. So it's, I don't know what the status of it now. But we've gone on to look at it in other districts. So it's personalized oral language learning. Carola, myself, and Elizabeth Magruder were the primary developers of it. And it includes family languages and interests, 3 main components: environmental supports and instructional supports. So 3 main components of POLE. So family languages and interests interview. One of the things that we felt was extremely important that happens with early childhood but doesn't happen as much in TK and kindergarten was early initial conversations with families to establish trust. Diverse families often don't trust institutions, don't trust monolingual English speaking, maybe haven't had good experiences, and rapport. We get to know families, and we get to know them through a face-to-face process that is not the 3-question home survey you send home. Is it 4 questions? Okay, you send home these 4 questions, and then you're supposed to know everything you know about children, about families and children. We decided, no, that we really wanted to have something more extensive. So we looked at a variety of examples, and we came up with this as a kind of a prototype, but it's been, it actually has been adjusted, and we've tweaked it around, and I use it in slightly different forms in different districts and whatnot. But what it is it's a method that gives teachers confidence to sit down with families and ask them questions about their child. And every parent wants to tell you things about their child. When they first learned to talk, what language are they exposed to, what are their favorite toys. Every parent will come alive. And so that's when they get to tell you, what it is about their child that's special, what it is about their child in their early language learning exposures. So that to me is probably as important as anything we do in partnering with families, because that tells parents, you are special, you are unique, you have this language. Maybe I don't understand the language and there's a translator, but somebody said it last session, that's a gift. That's an asset. That's what you're bringing into my program that I don't have, and I'm letting you know that. And so you get to tell me all about it, you get to tell me all about your child, and then I'm going to ask you to come into the classroom, because there are lots of things you can do in the classroom I can't do. One of which is talk to the children in this language. One of which is to help with picture books and naming things in picture books. One of which is helping labeling. All these kinds of things that they can help. And families, I don't know about your guys' experience, but once they get, I said sometimes some of my most active oppositional families, once they become part of your program, they become really high-energy collaborators in the program and think of all kinds of things to do and ways to help you with your program. So this is kind of the first step. They're not outsiders, they're insiders. They have things you don't have, and they can contribute.
Linda, question.
Yes.
And by the way, I didn't say it before, that stop her. She goes on 50 miles an hour. And so we want you to feel free to raise that hand and have questions. So go ahead.
Is there a link where we can access this template to
Well, you know, there actually is a copy in the preschool program guidelines that came out, what, 2 years ago? And yeah, is it chapter 7?
No, I don't think they're chapter 7.
Is it chapter 6, there's on dual language learners.
That's CDE in terms of if you go into CDE website and the preschool guidelines, right?
And I would advise you sit down with your staff and look at it and see if this really meets our needs. Do we want to cut some of it off, add some other ones, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's a good starting point to start to developing your own tailored kind of tool to do this.
And
yeah.
one of the things that's been powerful about this tool, because in Head Start, there's a lot of family interviews that go on, but one of the things the partners of ours who've been doing this in Head Start say, none of them have had a focus of language. So this is a specific set down where you're really talking about language, who speaks what goes on, where you really are valuing the home language and how it's used and how we can support one another.
So when you ask well, I would go in and I would ask the teachers, well, what are the languages? Sometimes they wouldn't know. You know, they had never actually had that conversation with them. Well, it's not English. It sounds like maybe it's an African, you know, it's like they have some sound systems, but they don't really know. Through this, they will know an awful lot more.
Another question back here.
Oh,
Linda.
good, okay. Program guidelines, do you remember, do you have the date?
CDE, if you Google, you just put CDE, Program Preschool Guidelines, and it will immediately give you the option, the first link. It's a PDF.
Yeah, and even if you go into CDE and put preschool program guidelines, Google will get it for you right away.
And it's I mean, you can download the whole book. It's not a problem. It really isn't. And then you have the whole book, yeah. So I would definitely download that. Okay. Okay. So getting the most of your time with your families. So the other aspect
Now
of...
we're switching it over to Anna.
Sit down, Linda. That's okay. I follow directions. English or Spanish?
Okay. Yeah. And she'll be back talking too. I just get to do this part. So I'm the coach for the Fresno Language Project, so I get to hear all these great stories that come up when these teachers meet with the parents to do this interview. And so it is the time for you, as teachers to really sit down and get to know these families. A lot of the times, we're busy with other things that we do, but when you actually sit down and get to ask these questions, such as who lives in the home, what languages are your children exposed to? And interestingly, some things that some of the teachers have found out is that, parents are working all day. So parents are only English speakers, but the person that's taking care of their child once they're picked up or after school is or speaks another language. So then you are able to find that out. Because one of the things that we found out through this interview is that teachers were not, wondering like, why isn't he responding to English? Mom said that, that's their home language. Well, come to find out that the child spends most time on the weekends with grandparents, aunts, or uncles who speak another language other than English. So that was something that we learned through it.
Can I just say, sorry, here I am, back again. We did actually a little study with this family languages interview and English proficiency, English and Spanish proficiency, then a year later. And the best predictor was the primary caregiver. It was not the parent. Whoever is watching that child all day, whoever that primary caregiver is, that is the person that this child is learning language from. And that will reflect then where their language skills are the strongest. So that's really important for us to know.
And then another thing too, it gives you an opportunity, like Linda mentioned earlier, to get to learn these a little bit about these families, what skills and talents they might have. Sometimes some of the teachers have reported, when they engage in conversations with parents and they ask them, well, what skills and talents do you have that you can share with us in our classroom? And they'll say things like, I don't know how to do anything. This is what I do for a living, and they talk about it. But just the simple fact that they speak a second language, that right there is an asset to the learning setting. So acknowledging that language. And like Linda said earlier, it gives you an opportunity to invite parents. Through this interview form, some of the teachers have learned some of the professions that these parents have. Some of them are teachers, some of them own businesses. And so some of those jobs that they hold support some of those studies that they are implementing in their classrooms. So again, reaching out to parents to support those learning opportunities that, you're offering to the children is an asset. And to see the faces of those children brighten up when they see their parents or, grandparents, aunts and uncles come into their classroom, it's like, that's my mom or that's my grandma, so that just brings a lot of pride and joy into them. So that's one of the wonderful and intentional teaching opportunities that we've learned through the interview form. And then, again, the ongoing and planned communication. Getting parents involved to reading and storytelling, cooking a family recipe. These are some of the things that some of our families have been supporting the learning settings. We had a family who owns their bakery. So when the intentional teaching was around that, this parent came in and brought, some of the bread that they cook at their bakery and sang songs and read books to the children, and it was just a very powerful. Some siblings have skills and talents such as playing a musical instrument. We've seen that in our learning settings as well. So it opens up an opportunity to engage all the family, not only parents, but siblings, grandparents, aunts and uncles, those primary caregivers who provide care for these children outside of our programs. Family engagement is not a process, not an event. So again, getting to know your families and continuing to do that while their child is in your care. There are many ways to continually involve families in your learning community. So it's not, one size fits all, but it's getting to know our families and acknowledging their skills, and what a better way to do that by validating their home language and supporting that in your learning settings. And then we go on to poll, and I think that's Whit.
Yeah, questions up to this point about anything that Linda has said or Anna? Okay. I'm one quick story about that family languages study. One of our state preschool teachers that's been involved in the project, who was, it was interesting. She was probably not hesitant, but anxious about doing this. She is monolingual English speaking, and she was anxious. She worked with a translator, and they did the interviews. And she had one mother who had come to enroll the child, and she'd never seen her since. That was the one involvement with that mom. And so she sat down. The mom was monolingual Spanish speaking. And through this process, she exposed herself as being monolingual English speaking, and how many children were Spanish speaking in her classroom. Thank you so much. You're good at that, you guys. At first I took that as we don't like what you're saying, but that was but I'll get over here. So that, but after the conversation, she discovered the mother was not a working mom, and she was at home with the only child. And so once they had this conversation, she became a daily volunteer. She had never seen her before. She became a daily volunteer and came in and would speak in Spanish and read to children in Spanish. It was a gift. And when this teacher sat down with her, this teacher was saying, I don't have that gift, and I need you. And so they worked together. We had lots of stories like that about this. When Anna was talking about what really interesting, we've had a lot of learning that older siblings play instruments. And so this idea of bringing the older sibling coming in and playing an instrument with the children, it really has been the family engagement and valuing, both in terms of language but culture, that they bring to us. So I'm going to talk about this poll, personalized oral language learning. And I also want to talk about something, because I look at Marlene, and what was interesting when we were starting transitional kindergarten, Marlene and Linda, we had a little pot of money from CPIN. This is a little pot of money we had years ago from CPIN to just take a look at what was going on with our dual language learners. And so Marlene and Linda looked at our cohort of kids entering kindergarten. And so that what was going on. And so around our dual language learners. And so at that point, I'm going to be honest, we were using a heavily decoding curriculum. It was really focused on decoding. What they discovered was our dual language learners looked really good in kindergarten. They looked really good in kindergarten. They followed that same cohort of kids into second and third grade, and they were way down on their achievement. And so what we know, and Linda and Marlene helped me understand it, decoding has nothing to do with, kids can learn decoding. Dual language learners, have you ever done this with a dual language learner when you sit down, the kid will read, and then you'll say, let's talk about it, and there's no comprehension. And so that what we discovered was there was really this big gap. We had decoding skills without language depth. And so that really did help us when we went to start TK, realize we need to have a language focus. And so we were so lucky to have people like Marlene and Carola and Linda and Elizabeth help us in terms of starting this program. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about what are the components of this thing that we call POLE. So at the heart of this, and Carola and Marlene and Linda have all talked a lot about this, is reading aloud to children, the whole concept of dialogic reading, interactive reading, many names. But we know around dual language learners the depth and importance of it. It is, this reading aloud to children. The power of a good story builds vocabulary, develops listening skills, promotes an interest in books, and develops a sense of story. So that at the heart of this, we were thinking about, okay, then the idea of books and stories had to be crucial. We knew the research was clear about that, had to be crucial as we developed this system. So here...
Just a little point about that. So much involvement with the families, and part of the role that families can play is to read that book to that child in the first language so they get the content, they get the key vocabulary words, so that once you do read it in English, whether it's a small or large group, they actually know what's going on. And Carola actually has a module about dialogic reading in Spanish and a URL, and you would be available to give it to everybody, because there are training materials about how to do dialogic reading in Spanish. And how many modules are there? Two. Okay, two. But they have lots and lots and lots of little segments in them about and which books to use and how to do it and everything. So this process works for all children, and there are examples of exactly how to do it with dual language learners that you would then transfer to English only as well.
So what we started with then was what we call the anchor text. It's interesting. We've sort of transformed it a little into anchor text / experience. So that what we're talking about, but we started with anchor text. So those of you who use a curriculum that has text as part of the curriculum, that can be your anchor text. This is not a new curriculum. This isn't replacing any curriculum that's out there. Whatever your district or your program is using, this can apply to that curriculum. But you would have an anchor text. In this example, we're going to do mouse count up there. So that might be the anchor text we were looking at. And then we talk about vocabulary and intentional messages. So instead of just reading the book, and just sort of haphazardly, did you like it? Was it interesting? To really be focusing on the vocabulary that's in that text. What is going on there? And developing what we call intentional messages. And so these are both oral and written. And so if you have an anchor text you're using, or if you're doing a study, I know some of your curriculums you study, or thematic units, so whatever that anchor text is there, you would be talking about what's the intentional message. So here's an example. Today, mathematicians, we will compare numbers from 1 to 10. So that they're rich in vocabulary. They're rich in vocabulary. And then what we do is we talk about not just then repeating that and repeating the intentional message, posting the intentional message, sharing the intentional message with parents and volunteers, so everybody knows what they're doing. I've got to tell you, UCLA uses an approach like this where they have these intentional messages. A friend of mine's 2-year-old came home and said, today we learned about pulleys. And so they do a science orient. But it is that idea that we're giving this very clear focus and vocabulary to kids about what we're doing. And then this is what I learned so much especially from Elizabeth, and that is I have sung songs my whole career, 50 years in the field. What I didn't do was write songs and chants focused on the vocabulary I was interested in kids learning. And so that's what has been really wonderful about this. You take that anchor text, you take the intentional message, and you use songs and chants that contain that vocabulary. We know the power of repetition. We know the power of songs and chants. We use it in a very intentional way. I think it's scaffolding. It is really how we scaffold that learning in a very intentional way. And then we use the gestures, the visual cues that go along with that vocabulary and with that intentional message. And it's called what, Linda?
Total physical response.
Total physical response. So we're using all of that together in terms of our program. So I'm going to give you here. Oh, this is really important. It's throughout the day and daily. One of the things what happens is about the songs and the chants and the vocabulary, a lot of times, we say we're doing our little story, our lesson, and then it's over. Then we go off and do 1,000 other things. What we're doing in this is we're repeating those songs and chants and those messages throughout the day. There's those opportunities, and you'll see it in our program. You'll go to a program, and kids will be out on the trike circle, and they'll be singing that chant as they're going around in the trike circle. And so it is using the power of that to really keep embedding that, imprinting that with kids. And so it's instructional supports for DLLs to listen, comprehend, practice the vocabulary and concepts across classroom contexts that are integral to oral language development. So we're going to talk about, Anna's going to be talking about sort of the environmental extensions. So in your centers, your interest areas, you're thinking about that intentional message, you're thinking about opportunities for kids to have hands-on experiences that will be reinforcing to that. So I'm going to give you here some examples. This was where we were talking about structures. Talking about structures. And so here we have a number of anchor texts that could be used around structures so that you're reading the selections repetitively, fostering vocabulary and concept development through interactive conversations. We have the one thing that you may want to hedge a little bit with some of your curricula, that we have found that some of the boxed curriculum move too quickly through anchor text, so that we're on to a new anchor text in 2 days. And so it's not giving kids the opportunity to really have fun and play around with both the vocabulary and the intentional message. So I think that that's one of the pacing. I think that's what you're sort of talked about in K-12. You may want to look at the pacing schedules with your curricula. But here we've got a lot of different books that talk about structures. And then we are talking about this is from Elizabeth Magruder, and it helps me so much. So that it's about vocabulary development. In what ways can we help children make meaning? So it's so many words, be selective and intentional. When we're talking about our dual language learners, just think, look at some of those books, how many words there are. It's just phenomenal. I mean, and you know those words, so you don't think about it. But we have to think, especially around the intentional message and our choices, what are we going to target? What are we going to focus on? And repetition is key. I mean, and this is where the wonderful advantage of the songs and chants is a natural opportunity for repetition. And then words represent concepts. And so that we're not looking at words in isolation, but what is the meaning, what is the concept there? And this is really interesting. This has been helpful to our teachers. Easier is when it's a new word to a known concept. It's a new word to a known concept. So that if it's something that, like washing my face, that's something I do. So we may add words to that because it's something I do. What is harder is a new word and a new concept. It's a new word and a new concept. And so that they both happen in our programs. They'll both happen in books. But we want to be clear that we're going to have to spend more time and be more intentional when it's a new concept to a child and it's a new word. So this is interesting. Construct, tall, study, blocks, building, enormous. When you look at the amount of vocabulary, the one anchor text, the one intentional message, and multiple pieces of vocabulary that can be there. Okay, this is vocabulary learning is incremental, teaching concepts and new words, never a one-time experience, rather a connected and layer approach. So here we go. Structures are introduction of our word. We're introducing that word structure and then bringing meaning to it. A structure is something that we build. And then being an example, a building is a kind of structure. A house is a kind of structure. watch me use these blocks to build a structure. So we're talking about some physical opportunity. What did I build? I built a structure, repetition, and then what structure can you make? So it's this cycle, all focused around on structure, but with understanding there's multiple ways that kids are going to learn that. So embedded with content, I'm not talking about the intentional message. So here we've got one. Today we are going to observe and build a structure. Two big words, observe, structure, and build. Those are three big words actually in there. Okay, and then this idea that we can create songs and chants that go along with those words and that vocabulary and that book and that intentional message. So you now get the joy of singing these chants with me here. And this first one is to the ABC song. So let's go. Build a structure very tall. Build it strong so it won't fall. Build it strong right at the base. Add more blocks, it needs more space. Build a structure very tall. Build it strong so it won't fall. I got to tell you, I'm sorry she's not here. Camille Mabin is our state executive director of First Five California, and she's a fantastic chant writer. She is. I've been in these workshops with her. So one of the things Elizabeth did with TK teachers, this is a fun thing to do together. It really, sometimes it's more difficult, and so we would use some of our staff meetings to come together and decide on some common themes and anchor texts we were going to use, and then share some songs and some chants that we could use together. Here's a...
Combine it with total physical response.
Yes, total physical response. Or build a... Yes.
So that each of those targeted words has both the song and
Right.
the gesture, physical gesture to go along with it. And you can eliminate the word, do the gesture, or use those, play around with it.
Okay, here's another one, and this is if you're happy and you know it. It goes, if you think you can build it, then... I'm sorry, I'm off on the beat. If you think you can build it, then you can. What a structure! If you think you can build it, then you can. What a structure! You can stack the blocks up high. It will almost touch the sky. If you think you can build it, then you can. What a structure! Let's do that one again. That was so good. And no one is loud enough on what a structure. Come on. If you think you can build it, then you can. What a structure! If you think you can build it, then you can. What a structure! You can stack the blocks up high. It will almost touch the sky. If you think you can build it, then you can. What a structure! We had a TK teacher named Barbara Blakely, who was just a wonderful teacher. We did some videoing of her, and she was doing the structure as her intentional message. And in this video, and it goes on, it's a long, she says structure 5 jillion times. And it's interesting, and it comes naturally. It wasn't like she kept thinking, it's not like I got to say structure, but became part of what she was doing with kids, what she was singing with kids, and all the kids were talking about structures there. And then we talk about using those visual cues along with the songs and chants, along with the intentional messaging. This is not new stuff to you guys. It is not. This is what you do. This is good teaching. The difference is we're a little more intentional about it. It's focusing in, just like it's not focused. We're not doing it. We're looking at what is our targeted vocabulary, what is our intentional message, how are we really focusing, how are we doing that front loading, like Linda was saying, in terms of vocabulary for kids. If they don't know what that means, how are we using home language for them to understand that word? It's not new. It's just being more intentional about it. Okay, environmental supports, I think, is Anna.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what Whit and Linda talked about, the post strategies. It's all intentional. And what I've found from some of the teachers that are part of the Fresno Language Project is their children are helping them create the songs and chants. So there was one particular learning setting where this one little girl, she loved singing. So every time, it was going to be a new intentional teaching the week before, the practitioner will say to her, Kati, I need help, with this song. These are going to be our words. And she would create the song with the tune and everything. And there was so much pride in her. So she was always looking forward to the next intentional teaching so that she can help her teacher with the songs and chants. And it was awesome. And I think she shared it at one of our professional development trainings that we had. And I mean, it's just beautiful because then that just mirrors in the home environment. And then the parents are asking, the practitioners, I hear her singing this song, so much, can you share it with me? So again, that family engagement. And then going back to the family language interview form, that's one of the ways that most of the practitioners that are part of the Fresno Language Project, they're engaging families by sharing with them the songs and chants that they are singing the following week with their child. They're sharing with them the intentional vocabulary words that they're going to be learning the following weeks to come, along with intentional messages, along with some ways that they can support the child at home and how they can support the child in the learning settings, such as reading books, coming and using a musical instrument or any skill or talent that they might have with the learning setting. So talking about the environment, that's where children learn. So it's important for dual language learners in particular. It's important because we want them to feel safe. And one thing that a lot of our practitioners in the Fresno Language Project realized after they, and I'm going to be honest, and I think we talked about this in the first session about the myths. Being Spanish being my home language, you're thinking, it's not okay to speak that language in your learning setting, and that was my mentality when I was a teacher, and that shifted. So when we talked about the myths the first year in the Fresno Language Project, I thought, oh my gosh, all this time I could have been talking in Spanish to these children, but you only know what you know. So that was an aha moment, not only for me, but for a lot of the practitioners in the room. So then, learning that, they went back into the learning settings and started using their home language, the language that they knew to speak, and not only that they knew, but that reflected some of the children in their classrooms. So a lot of the children whose home language was Spanish or Hmong, when they heard the teacher speaking it, it was like, oh wow, you talk like me? So then they knew that it was okay for me to speak Spanish, it's okay to me to speak Hmong, and the children identify who they can speak that language to. So there's been a lot of aha moments, in our learning in Fresno. So validating their home language, to help them feel safe. And not only the child, but the parents. The language is their identity. That's who they identify themselves with. So it's important to, validate that, accept it, and know that it's a safe place. And, they feel respected, understood, and encouraged, and challenged. So that's one of the ways that, we can continuously support dual language learners. And then the how. So how am I utilizing the space? We have these, environments in our classrooms, and it's like, okay, well, I think that, that looks pretty there, but is it going to meet the needs of my children and my care in my environment? So how are or will children use each area? And how will I modify or adjust the environment? And how does my space value and support dual language learners? So one of the ways that some of the practitioners are using, this information that we're learning from our professional development learnings is, and I believe I go to the next slide, is labeling, in the languages spoken of the children in the classroom, and help them to identify those areas with visuals, the print, and they're reaching out to families to support those home languages. A lot of us might not speak Arabic, but if you reach out to the parents and they can help you with those translations, and what a value and validation it is for those parents for you to reach out to them for support. The where do I see children and actively engaged? So thinking about where will I place furniture? Where will large and small group gatherings and activities take place? And I think we talked about this earlier, about the ratios in our classrooms and stuff. So being very intentional about how we are, doing our large and small groups to facilitate those rich language opportunities for our children. Where will noisy and quiet areas be so active learning can take place? So these are a lot of the things that, as teachers, if we really want to support children's oral language development, we really have to start thinking about these kinds of things. Where children go for a break? A lot of learning settings have what we call quiet areas, with materials that help them kind of self-regulate. And so where will they go for a break? Us adults, sometimes, we have those designated areas where you can have a lunch break and stuff like that. So thinking about where can our children go for those kinds of breaks as well is important. And so that's a picture of a quiet area. The how. So making connections to environmental print. So the labeling. You really don't want to label every item in your environment, but label those items that are most important for children to be able to identify. And having them in multiple languages spoken by the children in your learning settings. Earlier, Linda shared that there's 45 to 50% of the words that are cognate words, right, Linda? From Spanish to English, so making those connections to help build the vocabulary is also very important, and that's one of the ways that teachers can do that. Having some of the print, like this one is the hand washing song routine in English and in Spanish, and some of the learning settings that I get to work with have their songs and chants displayed in different areas of their environment, indoors and outdoors, where diapering and bathroom, business takes place, where meal times take place, because that's a great opportunity for us to engage in conversation. And, as Whit mentioned, through songs and chants, the repetition. And especially if you have your vocabulary embedded in it, that's a beautiful way to do it. I had one of the teachers that I support, I visited her site last week, and as soon as she saw me walk into her classroom, she said, "Anna, I have something to show you. It's really cool. You're not going to believe it." So they're doing the clothing study with the creative curriculum. And so they were outside, and the children had clothing in their water table with soap and stuff. So the teacher, is engaged in conversation, and all of a sudden, there's 4 children there at the water table, and they just start singing the chant naturally. And she just happened to have her phone on her, and she recorded it, and she showed me, and it's so organic. It's not like, let's sing our chant right now. It was child-initiated, and it was awesome to see. And you can see the pride in her, and she said, it's working. The songs and chants, they're getting it, because there's some songs and chants that, we're excited about, but the children are not too excited. So it's finding that tune, that really matters to align with the words. So the how, the scaffolding to support dual language learners. Again, the labeling in English and the home language, and start with physical items and the color coding. We have one learning setting that has 4 languages. So they have it color coded to represent each language. And the 4th language, the parent is the one that has been supporting them with the translation for the environmental printing. So that's another way for us to use the interview form. The how. So how are we going to make those connections in the environment? So with realia, with photographs, so we're in the written words in home language and English, the actions and the songs. So these are just some ways, with the hands-on learning opportunities that we offer to the children. That's how they are able to really understand and comprehend these concepts that we're introducing to them, So that's one of the ways that, POLE, with the extended activities, supports this. So it's like Whit mentioned, it's not, we read our book at 8:10, we read our chant, we sing our chant right after, we do our small groups, and then we call it a day. It's all day, ongoing. It's not a one-stop. You do it all day throughout the day. So one reflection from one of the learning settings that I would support, and that reminds me because I see this picture. She said, I noticed that in the morning, the children are not really interested in the extended activities that I'm offering. So my goal is to offer it not only in the morning, but offer it in the afternoon. So that was a way of her being reflective, because she didn't want to just bring it out and 2 out of the 6 children be able to engage in those hands-on activities. But she said, I'm going to offer it in the afternoon as well, so that they all get an opportunity to do it. And if they decide not to come in the afternoon, that's fine. We'll keep trying. So, being very reflective. The daily schedule. The daily schedule reminds me as an adult when I attend a professional development, and just like here, what's our agenda? When do we get a break? When is lunch? So it's the same for children, so having the daily schedule, letting them know what's going to happen next, what the main activities that are going to happen throughout the day, and having it in the home language and English is very important, along with pictures that support it. The times for language of focus, when are we going to be supporting the home language? And we use it to show and describe what is happening next, to show and describe what comes next, and to show families and visitors the routines that involve the children in the process. So some of the learning settings that I support, they actually have children, a different child every day who is responsible for, the daily schedule. And it's interesting because sometimes, we're so busy as teachers that we get carried away and we forget to remind, our schedule helper to move the arrow because, we're busy. And so then the child will say, oh, I'm going to go move it because we're not here anymore. We're here now. And then after here, we're going to go here. So it not only helps the teachers know what they're doing, but most importantly, the children, and especially those children who have a hard time with transition and are new to your learning setting, the use of the daily schedule is very important. And not only for the children, but for the parents. Sometimes, I know from my experience when I was working with children in their classrooms, when children arrive at, a time that is that, they're used to getting there when breakfast is served, and they arrive at a time that is not breakfast, they immediately go to the table because that's what they're used to, right? It's like it's breakfast time, and if it's not breakfast time, it's like, wait a minute, why are we outside? So having the visual schedule really helps children and also families as well. Extended activities using the home language and English. So these are the rich language experiences that we're offering to the children in our environment to enhance the vocabulary and concept development. So this goes deeper with the concept. So this is when you're doing your small groups and really having those extended activities that are going to support your intentional message, that are going to support your vocabulary, and most importantly, your songs and chants, which have your vocabulary embedded. And it's organic. Like Whit said, it's not like we're going to, we're structure, but it's more engaging in those conversations with the children organically so that we do engage in those conversations with the children at these times. And it's not, well, you have 10 minutes to do this. It's very intentional. And, share and connect with families about what matters the most. And this is where, again, if you have parents who speak another language other than English or have skills and talents, they can help facilitate some of these small groups. I was working with a learning setting, and she had 4 children whose home language was Spanish last year. And one of the parents was very much involved. She was the crosswalk guide, and she would come in twice a week and facilitate a small group in Spanish and support that Spanish language in the classroom because the teacher was only, her only language that she spoke was English. So that was a way of that parent supporting the home language. And then it also helped the teacher pick up on some Spanish words so that she can also support that language with the child. So this is where the coach's perspective comes in, which is my role in the Fresno Language Project. So I support 19 learning settings, all birth to 5. And so I do 3 coaching sessions a month, which involve observations and one-on-one conversations with these teachers. These conversations are not about what Anna wants to hear or what Anna wants to see in their learning settings. It's conversations that the teachers want to have that connect back to the PUL strategies. I find myself that I only sing the chant once a day. I need to do it more. So then they generate goals around that strategy. So it's very, it's a strength-based approach. So it's not me saying, well, like I said earlier, you need to do this. It's more of a reflection for the teachers to think about what they're doing. And I also use videotaping. So sometimes, the teachers will say, well, I don't know how I'm doing. I feel like my group time is too long. Well, let's see. So then that's when I come in and I intentionally focus on those areas that they want to work on. I go at different times of the day to see because PUL does happen throughout the day. So if I go for, say, for example, 2 times that month and I go from 9 to 10 and I only see certain strategies, then I'm able to share that with the teacher and wonder with her, what other times of the day do you do this and do you do that? And hear what she has to say and show her some of the video footage. So it's more of what they want to do, and the goals are all generated around their observations, their reflections. And what I do when we generate these goals for my next observation, I review them because I want to be very intentional on what I need to capture so that I can provide that back to the teacher. So I don't want to go in there focusing on just recording everything because there's a lot of great conversations and engagements that happen, but I go in there with the lens of focusing on songs and chants, the reading of the Anchor textbook, depending on what the teacher really wants to work on. The reflection? Okay. So I'll just skip through these pictures really quick. So this is one of the teachers using her poll strategies, reading the intentional message, and she has her vocabulary there with the children. This is another example of the poll strategies in the environment. The anchor text experiences with infants, toddlers, all the way up to pre-K. The intentional messages, they can be written or verbal. So these are just some examples of what some of the learning settings have in their environments. Again, intentional messages. And then the songs and chants and the reflections.
So this is what we want you all to do right now. And at your tables, and this is not speaking up to us right now, but to each other, just take a few minutes to identify best practices and challenges in your work right now. So what's going on, not just in terms of how you're going to implement what we've just said, but what's going on now at your sites. And that second question is, what do you want to know more about? So just take a few minutes at your tables to share together sort of what are the best practices and the challenges. So sort of the ups and the downs about what's going on at your site, and then think a little bit about where you'd like to head and what you want to know more about. So let's take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll do some sharing together here before we do our evaluations. Okay, we have about 8 minutes before I'm supposed to let you do your evaluations. So, but I would like to hear if people, the two things here, identify best practices and challenges. So I'm interested if some of the good things that are going on that you're feeling good about in your TK programs. Anyone willing to, yeah.
So I'm not the world's best person to come up with chants and songs, and sometimes singing a tune. I am tone deaf, but somebody introduced me on YouTube. There's a guy named Basho. I don't know if you guys ever heard of him. He sings songs in English and Spanish, and he's also dabbing into Mandarin and other languages. So he has songs in about colors and in both languages. So in the beginning of the school year, I just play that. So as they're doing work on the table or senders, free choice, whatever, I constantly like having music because silence is, I don't like it. So, but I enjoy the songs as well, and because the kids see me singing them and getting into it, they got into it. So whether or not that song is playing and they're doing their work, all of a sudden I hear Rojo la manzana, verde una rana, and they're like doing their work, they're doing whatever, but they're constantly singing. So even like my shy kid who still go, they're now singing that song. So I'm trying like, oh, did you like that song? And she's still looking at me like, lady, I'm not going to speak to you, but I'll go sing that song when you're not looking at me. So for me, that is, I think, the best practice because they're still getting that oral language development. And now we're transitioning to that color song into English. He still does that. So now they're starting to pick up that language and sing the song. And then the challenge is, my class were predominantly Spanish speakers, and you take the English word and you put the Spanish flair on it. So a lot of them are like to use the word movie, M-U-B-I, and I'm like, no. In my mind, you're thinking, no, you don't say movie, you say película. So that's the challenge, is not to diminish what they're speaking at home, but to teach them the correct way to say certain words. And so I'm constantly, oh, okay, you saw that película. Oh, how did you like that película? I'm using that word, and they're still saying that word. So hopefully my goal is by the end of the school year, they'll be like, oh, I went to go see that película. So if I can get one student to say that.
Marlene talked about this. I think it is about being a good language model. And so it doesn't mean that you're correcting anyone. You know, it's not, you're right, you're not correcting anyone, but you become a good language model, and that's so important. That's really crucial. Anybody else with some best practice or something they're feeling good about around Duolingo, or challenges? I'm happy to, come on, somebody's got a, I hate to pinpoint here. Come on there. I could see you were going to say something.
I don't really need that.
Okay.
I teach TK, I speak loud. So, long story short, what was that?
They're recording. It's, okay, here, there you go. Go ahead.
Now I'm going to blush. Okay, so we have dual language in our district. It's fantastic. But at my school, we haven't transitioned into dual yet.
We have 6 TKs in the district. 5 of them are in English. 1 of them is in Spanish. Well, based upon like kids getting to campuses, they can only go to the one that's closest to them. So I acquire all my 20 to 30, TKers. I speak in English to them, and I use my 4-year-old Spanish to translate things, so we build that relationship. I don't have conversational Spanish, but I definitely use Spanish in class. So they come to me for the year, and some are English speakers, some are Spanish, and they acquire all this great English language. And then the parent comes to me at the end of the year, and they say, where should we put our kid? And when they go from TK to kinder, there's only 2 options. It's you go into English kinder, or you go into Spanish kinder. But they're not being taught, like it's not translated in those classrooms. So the parents come to me and say, what do you think? And I say, well, you're the advocate for your kid, you're the advocate for your child, and you have to make the best decision for them. But they have acquired so much English, and you're speaking great Spanish at home to them, and they have family members that are doing that. They've now acquired language, sounds, and why don't we put them into the English and continue? Because what's happening is they are going, some of them are choosing, I like that they've learned English, I'm going to put them with the English teacher, and they thrive. And then some of them say, well, they learned a lot, but I love Miss Hasso. I'm going to put them back into Spanish with Miss Hasso. And then they're in 4th grade, and because our program is faulty, they're still struggling to learn their English. So what do I let parents know? How do I help them? I don't want to hurt them. I guess my bottom line is I don't want to hurt them and give them all this English language, and then they go into Spanish kinder, and they're like, well, that's A says A and ah. That's not what she told me last year. Like if they're going to be in TK and they're going to go to Spanish kinder, they should be learning the sounds in Spanish. They'll get it. I'm not hurting them because I like them.
That's a good, we've got 3 renowned experts over here, so let's hear, and I think it is an issue as we talk about continuity and transition, it is an issue. It is like, we know that, and so in terms of, well, how do you face those kind of questions, Linda?
I mean, that's the reality. What you live with is the reality. It hasn't quite caught up to what we really know should be these best environments, but that's the reality that you live with. I mean, if you have some way of determining at the end of TK where is their language dominance, like are they really high in English and really low in Spanish, then I would almost kind of design an individualized program. So you think they can go into this English-only program and they will do just fine. And they probably can. But the problem is they're going to lose their first language. So that's where this plan or this approach that you would design at the end of the year would include more supplemental support in L1. And that may be lots of activities with the families. That may be an after-school class in Spanish. You have to look for ways. Yeah. And they're right, and you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right. So even though they go into an English classroom, which may be the best choice, given what your school has to offer, because going back into Spanish, then they're going to lose their English. That seems very discontinuous, and probably not helpful for either language. But I would look for ways to supplement that English academic experience that they're going to go into, and they may do just fine, so that they don't lose that Spanish level of proficiency that they have been progressing on during their time with you. And it can include lots of other people. It doesn't all have to happen at school, honestly, that's the only thing I can think of right now, given the reality of your situation. Maybe somebody else has something better.
But I think, I'm actually happy you asked this question, because this is the time we are in. I mean, I've got to tell you that I'm working in a community where we have been in Head Start and in our preschool programs, we're pushing for a balanced approach. And so one of the things that when they move into the K-12 are using a 90-10. And so our children are facing this discontinuity right now. And so we have to, I think, be supportive and also be advocates. I think that it is in terms of saying, how do we, not the fact that I'm saying there's one right answer to that, but we need to advocate for continuity for these kids. I think that that's what we need to be, because it is a confusing time, and I think that all of us are facing. Carl, you want to say anything? Because I know you see that too.
Well, and the other, for example, in Ventura, we have a lot of dual immersion schools and different kinds. You're great. Well, so what happens in early childhood in promoting the 50-50, right? The balanced approach so that both both are strong. A lot of our children move to other areas. We don't know what school they're going to end up in. Student mobility, family mobility is extremely high in California. And we want them to thrive regardless of the program, the school, the public school they end up in. And if they have strong skills in both languages, we know that they will be okay. But if we are doing a 90-10 in early childhood and they go into an English only, what will happen then? So that's a big, I think, concern that, and that's something we see often.
And we need to be talking about it. I'm glad, I mean, I'm so happy that you need to bring that up back in your.
And I feel like, I want to give the parents the best.
You can, just a sec, just.
Right.
I mean, in the early 90s, I was working in Redwood City, and we implemented, against the advice of our school board, a 50-50 approach for our pre-K and child development centers. And we had a control group that was 100% Spanish. Okay, so and we all used the same curriculum. The teachers were, it wasn't unequal teachers or anything like that. Our state pre-K was AM, PM. Our child development center was 11 hours. We switched off Spanish, English, AM, PM, just because that was our staffing pattern. After 2 years, we had these results. These kids skyrocketed in both languages. We didn't expect this. Rafael Diaz from Stanford was helping us with the research. This was the first bilingual study that had been conducted in California because, in essence, it was against policy. Okay, but we had worked with enough kids to say, wait a minute, this is an opportune time to learn language. So we did this study, and we got these amazing results that kids that were in a 50-50 dual language, high-quality bilingual program during the pre-K years, at kindergarten entry, they had strong, almost norm comparable skills in both languages. The kids that were in monolingual Spanish speaking, because that's all we could do at that time, classrooms, their Spanish did not increase as much as the kids that were in dual language programs. So their Spanish was toddling along. It wasn't decreasing. It was progressing, but not at the rates that the kids that were in bilingual programs. The kids that were in bilingual programs also had English. So anyway, we had all these data. Rafael, the professor at Stanford University, we came and presented these data to our superintendent and our school board one night because we were, jumping out of our shoes. We wanted to show this and to show them that at kindergarten entry at that time in California, the policy was 90-10, period. At kindergarten, it was 90% Spanish, slow introduction of English, 10% each year. 10% in kindergarten, 20% in first grade, et cetera. It never worked. 60% of kids never got reclassified. But nobody relooked at that. That was kind of a theoretical approach from Cummins and Krashens, if you'll remember. Okay, we came to our school board with new data, from district-wide data that said, look what can happen. These kids are almost proficient in both languages at kindergarten entry. We can teach them to read in English and Spanish. These are emergent bilingual. This is what we want for these kids for their life. Do you know what I was told? Okay.
Tell them.
Well, we're like hopping around, and the school board literally said to me, and I'm a short person. Okay, so this was probably part of it. But anyway, so they go, that's nice, Linda. But our policy is we do 90-10. Your data really is not. And we've published it twice in Child Development ECRQ. And they go, that's really nice. But we have our policies. They didn't want to change a thing. We actually kind of were in defiance of what the policy for the school district was at that period in time. There was none of the brain research then, nothing that we could have used to substantiate why this was happening with very young children. So my point to you is just that what you're doing is kind of a holdover, and it's very deeply embedded in belief systems of people that come out of K-12 education, old bilingualism. Seriously, I'm not making this up. And to shift that over to understand why this is missing opportunities to support full bilingualism, which in fact we now really know that Virginia, what's her name, They have longitudinal studies from K-12 through high school. The only approach that has resulted in DLLs achieving parity with their monolingual English speakers at middle school, high school, and graduation and college readiness, the only approach that has achieved that is a dual language 50-50 model. That is honest to God truth. We know that now, and that's thousands of kids from K, with consistency, with continuity. But what I'm saying, and I understand, like I said, this was early 90s. I'm still saying this. Now I understand why it's even more critical. It takes a lot of time, and we have to be willing to have people are not automatically going to change their opinion. If you say it, that's one thing. I had data of our own kids in our own district. If anything would have convinced people, I never imagined that people would dismiss the data.
She has a hand back there.
Sorry.
So how you were saying, 90-10 to the 50-50, but what if your student population has a low native language? So here we have our Spanish speaker students who do not possess a high level of Spanish. Isn't it a disadvantage to teach them a high level language of English when in their native language it is not adequate enough? Shouldn't our focus in TK or Kinder be to develop their Spanish first, because that's the language that I speak in my classroom, develop that Spanish, make sure they have a strong vocabulary so they have an understanding of what a película is before I go and teach them the word movie, because they're still saying movie.
Right. And I hear this actually quite a lot, because realistically, we do have lots of children who enter our system who do have low levels of L1, and we need to know that. If you'll think about what's one of the first things that I said this morning.
Linda, you've got to say, we don't remember. We're tired.
You're tired, okay. Language is language. Two languages does not overpower or confuse children. So the fact that they get good English input, even though their L1 is low, it doesn't dampen their L1 progress at all. What you have to do is make sure that L1 input is high quality and comparable to what they're getting in English. So we do need to pay attention to and very carefully support that. But that doesn't mean you have to exclude the second language. That was really my main point from this morning.
Okay, I have to stop. But this is such an important topic. But wait, what I want to say is there is some hope on the way. That these are topics that we all need to be talking about and learning about. The California Department of Education is allotting some new money for professional development. It is going to be coming out in January. Carola Matera is going to be one of the implementers of some of this. That SEAL that was talking this morning is going to be, that CPIN is going to be involved. We're going to be looking at what we've learned in Fresno. So there's going to be new opportunities. So you need to be aware of them and take advantage of them. There's going to be some opportunities around the state, both online. Carola's going to be doing online. We're going to be doing some institutes and some trainings. So be on top of this. In January, it's going to be announced through the California Department of Education, new professional development opportunities for all of you around dual language learners to begin to dig deeper into these very challenging questions. What is exciting to me is we are talking about this in a new way in California. And we have experts that can help us and figure this out. And for you, we talk about personalized oral language learning for you and your communities to figure out a way that you can best meet the needs of your kids. Thank you so much. And fill out those evaluations, please.